Give me oil in my lamp.
Give me oil in my lamp, keep me burning. Give me oil in my lamp, I pray. Give me oil in my lamp, keep me burning. Keep me burning till the break of day. Sing Hosanna, sing Hosanna, sing Hosanna to the King of Kings. Sing Hosanna, sing Hosanna, sing Hosanna to the King. Make me fisher of men, keep me sinking. Make me a fisher of men, I pray. Make me a fisher of men, keep me sinking. Sinking souls till Jesus comes again. Sing Hosanna, sing Hosanna, sing Hosanna to the King of Kings. Sing Hosanna, sing Hosanna, sing Hosanna to the King.
Good evening, everyone, and greetings in Jesus' name. I'm a little bit nervous tonight. I'll do my best to get through this, but what I decided I was going to talk about at the beginning of the week was the church's attitude towards racism in America. So please have grace with me. I'll give time at the end if anyone has any corrections or anything they want to add. But here we go. So yeah, a lot of people are talking about it. Then there's been 3 pretty notable murders within the last 2 weeks here. Ahmaud Arbery is just a kid jogging, and 2 guys chased him down and shot him. Breonna Taylor was shot while sleeping in her bed, and then George Floyd was kneeled on for 8 to 9 minutes and then died. So it's really got the whole country talking about what is this relationship between the black and white people. And I'm not going to roast the rioters or looters tonight. I feel that's kind of a slam dunk and doesn't do any good for us or them. And it is really tough to talk about racism because there's a lot of loud voices that believe it's the boogeyman that causes all the trouble in our country and use it as a weapon to silence anyone who doesn't say their shibboleths right and agree perfectly with them. That's garbage, and I don't think anyone here is slipping into that, so not going to talk about it there. And I almost look at this whole race debate as it's kind of like a marriage. Us white people, black people, and other minorities, we're all trapped in the same house here, and it's kind of been a dysfunctional relationship for a long time. And we both point a lot of fingers at each other, and so I'm not going to talk about what the black people should be doing different. There is some weight to them too, but I think there's error we can slip into as well if we're not careful. In certain times, the church has really messed this up. The one time I was thinking about it the most was touring the Holocaust Museum in D.C., and it was really interesting to see how much the church came up in leading up to the Nazis taking control of Germany. There was just a lot of slight, minor anti-Semitism that was part of the church. It was kind of just the common jokes or language of the people. And finally, when things escalated, the church remained silent as one of the greatest horrors of the last 100 years happened. And also within America, the Bible was leveraged in an awful way for the abuse of people. And so we should be careful and not let a hint of that within our own church because it can lead to oppression if we're not careful. And Jesus does provide a straight and narrow way that I believe is different than the extreme right or left talking points of today. I have plenty of my own opinions on this. I've been talking a lot about the week. It's tough. I find it very hard to come to concrete opinions, and I've changed my mind a couple times throughout this week. But anyway, so moving on. I think this does matter because people watch what we say on the internet, and we have minorities all around us, and I think judgmental attitudes or insensitive ones can cause pain or offense. So the first section of Scripture I want to look at is Jonah. Just going to read the first 3 verses of Jonah 1. And now the word of the Lord came unto Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness is come up before me. But Jonah rose up to flee unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord, and went down to Joppa. And he found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare thereof, and went down into it, to go with them unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. You know the rest of the story. Fish, vomit out of fish. To chapter 3 then. And the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, Arise, go into Nineveh, that great city, and preach unto it the preaching that I bid thee. So Jonah arose and went unto Nineveh, according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceeding great city of 3 days' journey. And Jonah began to enter into the city a day's journey, and he cried and said, Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. So the people of Nineveh believed God, and proclaimed a fast, and put on sackcloth from the greatest of them even to the least of them. For word came unto the king of Nineveh, and he arose from his throne, and he laid his robe from him, and covered him with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. And he caused it to be proclaimed and published through Nineveh by the decree of the king and his nobles, saying, Let neither man nor beast nor herd nor flock taste anything, let them not feed nor drink water, but let man and beast be covered with sackcloth, and cry mightily unto God. Yea, let them turn every one from his evil way, and from the violence that is in their hands. Who can tell if God will turn and repent, and turn away from his fierce anger, that we perish not? And God saw their works, and they turned from their evil way, and God repented of the evil that he had said he would do unto them, and did it not. And then you know the rest of the story. Jonah continued to stay bitter against this city. And it may be a little bit of a 21st century lens to look at this through racism, but he obviously had a prejudice against this culture that he thought he was too good to go and minister to them. And he was so blind that he didn't even see that they were the ones who actually did the more noble deed in this story. They actually repented, and he was so blind to it that he continued to be bitter against them. So what it means for me is be willing to sacrifice for people, even if you think you are, and it's awful to think you are superior to them, but never get to a place where you don't think it's worthy of your sacrifice to serve someone else. And for me, thinking about the places we see on the news right now, New York or Minneapolis, if there was handwriting on the wall for you to go and serve there right now, to be a light for God, that would make me wet my drawers. And I think we need to be open to that, if God would call us to that, to not think that it's not worth our sacrifice to serve those people. The next section I was going to read was John chapter 4. Jesus dealing with, or meeting with the Samaritan women at the well. I'm going to start reading in verse 3 of John chapter 4. He left Judea and departed unto Galilee, and he must needs go through Samaria. Then he came to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near to the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat thus on the well, and it was about the 6th hour. There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus saith unto her, Give me to drink. For his disciples were gone away unto the city to buy meat. Then saith the woman of Samaria unto him, How is it that thou, being a Jew, asketh me a drink of me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. Jesus answered and said unto her, If thou knewest the gift of God, and who it is that saith to thee, Give me to drink, thou would have asked of him, and he would have given thee living water. And then also at the end he talks a little bit about the temple where the Samaritans worship, which was a high point of contention. We all know that the prejudice that Jews had against Samaritans, but it wasn't completely built out of nothing. Samaritans didn't raise their children right. they didn't worship right. They were a bad influence on themselves. And they also disrespected the Jewish temple one time by throwing human bones into it on the Passover. And sometimes they would rob Jews as they traveled through Samaria. So that was why Jews often avoided it. So often when there is a racist attitude, it's somewhat justified. They don't behave well. That's why we don't associate with them. As a Christian, that is just faulty logic in my opinion. We should be careful of our influence, but I don't think there is anyone so evil that we shouldn't be hanging out with them. And never say something and realize that was a bit far to push it. Sorry. Anyway, there's some nuance to that maybe. But anyway, also lesson learned, Jesus deliberately chose to spend time with this person. And a lesson for us, what would it deliberately look like to spend time with some of the people we believe have a negative culture within their own group? So that's all for John. The next passage I wanted to read was Revelation chapter 7. Revelation chapter 7. Starting at verse 9. After this I beheld, and lo, a great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and people and tongues, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands, and cried with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God, which sitteth upon the throne, and unto the Lamb. And all the angels stood around the throne, and about the elders and the four beasts, and fell before the throne on their faces, and worshipped God. That is exciting to think about. At the end of time, we will be sharing heaven with all kinds of races and cultures. So how do we reflect that here on earth? I think it's our job as Christians to make it a little bit of heaven as much as we can. How will our relationships with people of all races be different, knowing that we will be sharing heaven with some of them? And I will believe it will be a lot more than just the few minorities that have been adopted into or chosen to join Mennonites. Next passage I would like to talk about, this kind of comes from whenever we talk about problems in minorities, what gets brought up a lot is they don't have good fathers, and that's the reason for a lot of their problems. And that's true, and it's really saddening. But the one verse it made me think of was from James. So James chapter 1, starting at verse 25. But whoso looketh into the perfect law of liberty, and continueth therein, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed. If any man among you seem to be religious, and bridleth not his tongue, but deceiveth his own heart, this man's religion is vain. Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world. So here's my hot take for the night. If a woman would put as much effort into applying 1 Corinthians 11, the head covering, as most Mennonites put into applying this passage, she would be excommunicated from the church. This is one I don't feel we apply a whole lot. Unspotted from the world, we try really hard, but I think this visiting of the fatherless and the widows is something we could step up in. It's also something, that idea is repeated in Luke 14, when Jesus is saying, when you hold a feast, don't invite your friends and family, anyone who will invite you back. Invite the poor and the needy and ones who won't invite you back. So I was just thinking, what would that be like if that was an unspoken part of our culture? That you have people who have maybe a half family or single parents, you just went over to their house once a week or had them over to yours. It was just kind of part of the DNA of the church, like wearing dress pants on Sunday or not going bowling. What if it just became automatic? How would the church be different? So anyway, one other passage I thought of was Romans chapter 12, starting at verse 14. Bless them which persecute you, bless and curse not. Rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep. Be of the same mind one toward another. Mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Be not wise in your own conceits. A couple things in here. I think there is an element of the extreme left that would want to persecute the church, and we should be wary of that and watch as our culture shifts, but bless them that persecute you. And also, the weep with them that weep. I think black culture in America is in a state of mourning right now. And we can talk about maybe why their mourning isn't justified or things like that, but I don't think now is the time for it. With as widespread as the protests are, and most of them being peaceful, I think it would do us well as Christians to take just a short moment to mourn with them. There's plenty of other time to talk about what we both can be doing to get back to a better relationship. So anyway, here are just a few things of my opinion on this. As we criticize rioters and looters, let's be consistent. I believe the United States military has destroyed more neighborhoods and lives than rioters and looters are, and sometimes I think we can drift into thinking that's just a necessary evil. We should be consistent on calling out violence and destruction wherever it is. And also, being willing to listen. It's pretty easy to find a lot of white voices online that agree with you. But here's my thought experiment for a little bit. Imagine there's someone who views all organized religion as just a sham and a patriarchal power structure. Then they hear about Anabaptists, they find it somewhat interesting, and decide to research online. And the first person they find is Trudy Metzger and Jeriah Mass stories. And then they find several other bloggers like her. It would be pretty easy to convince yourself that Mennonites are nigh unto a sex cult if you stay within that echo chamber of voices. And that's ludicrous. For those of us within Mennonite culture, that is a problem, but it's not the experience of most people. So be willing to listen to maybe some voices that don't quite agree with yours. Two that I would recommend from within the Anabaptist community that help broaden my perspective a little bit. Keyshawn Washington, he guy from York. He came here and spoke several years ago. But he now has a blog, and he's been talking about what's been going on in our country right now. And also, Katrina Hoover Lee has been doing a podcast, Voices of Survival, just interviewing people, having them tell their stories. It's her neighbors from where they live in Elkhart there. I feel a little bit awkward talking about this. A white guy talking about minority experience is kind of like a guy leading women's Sunday school, I think, but it's all we have right now. And this has gotten me to give more appreciation for the Anabaptist approach to political and social issues. Abortion is a political issue, but it's also a moral issue. And we can take a stand on it not by protesting at Planned Parenthood, but by opening clinics to work with moms who are considering an abortion, supporting them. Refugees and the poor are also political issues, but we can live out the gospel going to refugee camps and being with the people there and the poor. CAM gives out millions of dollars of aid every year, and I believe it's commanded by the Bible to be done carefully, as always gets brought up in these subjects. I think white savior complex and creating dependency are very dangerous. So then the thing that got me thinking was, if Floyd had been a native here in Sawyer County, what would be the right thing for us to do? I don't think it would be to protest at the corner by Quick Trip. I think just the classic Mennonite of making a meal and giving it to someone would be the best way to show support. To do what you can to show empathy and listen to their pain without raising too much of a ruckus. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Does anyone have any corrections or anything they'd like to add?
Thanks for giving me a front line today on the rehearsal.
You're welcome.
I appreciate you saying what you did. There's always this thing of iron sharpening iron. And what I appreciate is when we can frankly, openly discuss issues and try to make sense of them.
And that's the cool thing. Everyone I've discussed it with within the Mennonite world and here at our church, it's been a good discussion, actually. I've seen some nonsense discussions on Facebook, and it's been refreshing that we've been being somewhat blunt, but it's been a good discussion. If no one has anything else, I'd like to finish with a quote from someone I hope we all know. True evangelical faith is of such a nature that it cannot lie dormant, but spreads itself out in all kinds of righteousness and fruits of love. It dies to flesh and blood. It destroys all lusts and forbidden desires, seeks, serves, and fears God in its inmost soul. It clothes the naked. It feeds the hungry, comforts the sorrowful. It shelters the destitute. It aids and consoles the sad. It does good to those who harm it. It serves those that harm it. It prays for those who persecute it. It teaches, admonishes, and judges us with the word of the Lord. It seeks those who are lost. It binds up what is wounded. It heals the sick. It saves what is sound. It becomes all things to all people. The persecution, suffering, and anguish that come to it for the sake of the Lord's truth have become a glorious joy and comfort to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy and Patrick, for taking your part tonight. Next Sunday, we have song leader Stephen Taylor, devotions by Ben Hershey, children's class by Kyle, and topic by Gaylord on fasting. Then we'll turn the rest of the time over to Kim. Good evening to everyone, and invite you to join in our service tonight. Also, it looks like there may be people following online, so you can join in as well if you wish to. For the first song, you can turn to the Christian hymnal, and the last one here, number 510. What I'd like to focus on tonight is the word refuge, and thinking about that a bit. Many things that can unsettle us right now. We have COVID going on, we have riots going on. I'm hoping they're dying down. We're paying a lot of attention to that, but we need a refuge in these kind of times. Psalm 62:7 says, "In God is my salvation and my glory. The rock of my strength and my refuge is in God." David talked about refuge a lot. And there's many things we can... I was thinking about the riots, for example, and they're kind of closer than what they have been. I mean, Minneapolis isn't that far away, and then we're kind of 3 hours away, yet we're pretty safe. And then a little bit of rumbling in Duluth there for a day or two, whatever it was. And it's a little bit closer, and I was thinking, well, what would I do if it was in Rice Lake? Would I start getting nervous then? And then I think there was something going on in Hayward yesterday, if I saw it right. I didn't personally see it, but anyway, then I said, well, do I have kind of confidence in my geographical location? As long as I'm far enough away from the bad stuff, I will feel confident or safe. But the bottom line is our confidence needs to be in God as our only true refuge. And refuge is being safe or sheltered from pursuit, danger, or trouble. And, many things that pursue us, make us feel in danger or trouble us, but our refuge needs to be in God. So I will have just a number of songs from all three of the books here, and then at we can go about a quarter after, about in there, I will close this part of the service, and then Tyler will come up and give a bit of an update of what's going on in his life. So if you have questions or something, you can be thinking about that. So, all right, we'll begin with song number 510. Christine.
Oh, wonderful Savior is Jesus, my Lord, a wonderful Savior to me. He hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock, where rivers of pleasure I see. He hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock, that shadows a dry, thirsty land. He hideth my life in the depths of His love, and covers me there with His hand, and covers me there with His hand. Oh, wonderful Savior is Jesus, my Lord. He taketh my burden away. He holdeth me up when the shall be proved. He giveth me strength as my day. He hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock, that shadows a dry, thirsty land. He hideth my life in the depths of His love, and covers me there with His hand, and covers me there with His hand.
Last verse.
When clothed in His brightness, transported I rise to meet Him in clouds of the sky. His perfect salvation, His wonderful love, outshines the millions on high. He hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock, that shadows a dry, thirsty land. He hideth my life in the depths of His love, and covers me there with His hand, and covers me there with His hand.
And number 512. Same book. And we'll sing the first and the last verse.
In the rifted rock I'm resting, safely sheltered I abide. There no foes nor storms molest me, while within the cleft I hide. Now I'm resting, sweetly resting
Number 517. Oh, sometimes the shadows are deep, and rough seems the path to the goal, and sorrow sometimes how they sleep, like tempest down over my soul. Oh, then to the rock let me fly, to the rock that is higher than I. Oh, then to the rock let me fly, to the rock that is higher than I. Oh, sometimes how long seems the day, and sometimes how weary my feet, but toiling in life's dusty way, the rock's blessed shadow how sweet. Oh, then to the rock let me fly, to the rock that is higher than I. Oh, then to the rock let me fly, to the rock that is higher than I. Oh, near to the rock let me keep, in blessings or sorrows prevail, or climbing the mountain way steep, or walking the shadowy vale. Oh, then to the rock let me fly, to the rock that is higher than I. Oh, then to the rock let me fly, to the rock that is higher than I. All right, several songs from the Zion's Praises. Number 488. The music is cut off from that for some reason. Number 488. In the dark of the midnight, as I looked in my face, while the storm knocks above me, and there's no hiding place, mid the crash of the thunder, precious Lord, hear my cry, keep me safe till the storm has
Children of the Heavenly Father, safely in His bosom gathered, nestling bird nor star in heaven, such a refuge there was given. Neither life nor death shall ever from the Lord His children sever. Unto them His grace He showeth, and their sorrows all He knoweth. Though He giveth or He taketh, God His children ne'er forsaketh. Is the loving purpose holy to preserve them pure and holy.
All right, one more song yet in the church hymn. 402. Church hymn number 402. Sing verses 1, 2, and 4.
Lead us, O Father, in the paths of peace, without Thy guiding, and we go astray. And as the fallen sorrows still
Good evening, everyone. It's good to be here. I'm just pretty much gonna give you a brief overview of what I've been up to in the last 7 months. So I got to Mountain View October 12th. It was a Saturday, and I'm going to be there. My term length is for 18 months, so I'll be there for another 11 months. So when I first got there, I started CNA class pretty much right away. That's what I went for, to be a CNA, to work in the nursing home there. Mountain View has its own CNA class. One of the nurses that works at Mountain View is a certified CNA instructor, so it's really handy. We just do class right there at Mountain View. There's 5 of us in the classes, me and 4 other girls, and the class took us about 130 hours worth of class. It took us about a month and a half to get through the class, and as soon as you start class, you have to get 20 or 40 hours of instruction, and then you can actually start working. So it really feels like you have no idea what you're doing, and they kind of turn you loose. So while you're still a student, you can start working 8 shifts, as they're called. You're working with the residents, doing personal care. So pretty much what I do is work 8 shifts. I work janitor shifts, which is pretty much you empty trash cans and do the dishes and sweep the carpets and just stuff like that. That's janitor shift. There's also maintenance shifts where there's a maintenance supervisor there. He works full time, and you just pretty much do whatever he has for you. It can be mowing the yard, or cleaning out the heating unit filters, or fixing lights, or whatever. It can be pretty much anything. I also do laundry shifts, which is exactly what it sounds like. You do laundry all day, and I really like the variety. It's really, but like the CNA 8 shifts, they are definitely like the core of Mountain View. There's a lot of teamwork, a lot of camaraderie on the floor. That's working with residents. You're working on the floor. Not literally, but it's it's what it's referred to. Where the resident area is referred to as the floor, Before I went to Mountain View, I never pictured myself working there. Nursing homes weren't anywhere near the list of places I wanted to work, and pretty much every other guy says that there too. Like, they never thought they'd come here, but here they are, and I love it. It's great. And anyway, so the first month and a half was pretty much working janitor shifts and doing class. Class was like 9 hours a day. It could get pretty long, but parts of it were interesting. And then after we finished class, we needed to go take the state test. So we're certified to work in Virginia. There's a written test and a practical test, and me and one other girl from the class failed the practical test, so we just had to retest, and there was a real scheduling fiasco, so I wasn't able to get rescheduled until like a month and a half later. So I felt like I kind of got felt kind of disconnected from working on the floor, and that was actually kind of tough because, like I said, CNA is very, very central to Mountain View, and I was kind of part of it and just getting used to it, and then had to stop because I had failed my test, and but then we both passed the second time, and glad that's behind me now. Let's see. So everything was going pretty good. I think it was about January till I had taken my test again and was certified as a CNA then. And then I went on night duty for 2 weeks, and that's fairly normal because you have to get your sleep pattern changed over from sleeping during the night to sleeping during the day. And once you get that changed over, you want to stay in that as long as you can. So I was on night duty when COVID hit, and COVID definitely changed up a lot of things. The first big thing that really got changed up was we were more or less quarantined to campus. It didn't affect me all that much because I didn't have any travel plans, but there was quite a few people who did have travel plans that unfortunately had to be canceled, and that was pretty tough. So we were allowed to leave campus, but we weren't allowed to go into town, or we could go camping, and that was about it. So it was like that for about a month and a half. Another thing that got changed up was the residents usually all ate like in a dining room. They sat around tables, and they had to be moved so they were all 6 feet apart from each other. So there's the dining room, and then there's like the great room beside us where they usually spend the day. And so like we pretty much just scattered the residents over the dining room and the great room. It was really strange right at first because it was very chaotic, and just felt really weird just having the residents just scattered all over the place. Some were eating at the nurses' station, and some were eating back in their rooms. And it's fairly normal now. We're still doing that because that's the regulations that the nursing home is still under. And we haven't had any cases at Mountain View. None of the staff have had it. None of the residents have had it, thank goodness. Just recently, a week or two ago, we started wearing masks while we're working on the floor with the residents, just partially because it was recommended. As far as I know, it wasn't a regulation or a requirement, but it was recommended that the staff at nursing homes wear masks while working with the residents. And also, a couple weeks ago, the Mountain View administration decided to let staff go home, so that was, of course, really upping the risk of infection because we're going home and visiting how many people. So that's what actually I'm on kind of coronavirus leave because they're just pretty much tried to give everybody the chance to go home for 2 days, try to get 3 nights, 2 days at home for everybody. And for a long time, I did not think that I would be able to be here tonight because the original requirements for going home were that you would go home and see no one but immediate family. And that's what I was fully expecting to do when I came home. But then on Wednesday, so like 4 days ago, they had another meeting and said that we can go to church and pretty much just follow the laws in whatever state you're in. So that was a really pleasant surprise for me that, oh, okay, now I can go to church. So, yeah, it was COVID definitely was a pretty stressful time. They put the administration in a really tough spot because Mountain View is a nursing home, but it's not like any other nursing home because almost all the staff live right on campus. So they're technically one residence, but Virginia was pretty strict, and for a long time it was like no groups of people larger than 10 were allowed to congregate. But I mean, we have in the one dorm there's 30 people living together, so they're technically one household. So there was a lot of rules that made no sense, just because of that. The two conflicting things, if it's Mountain View's a nursing home, but it's also a household with 40 people in it. So that really caused some stress between the administration and the staff, but we got through it, and I actually kind of enjoyed that we as staff got pretty close to each other, because it was just us for a month and a half there on campus, and nobody left and nobody came. Actually, a few new staff did come, but there was no visitors that came in. But yeah, overall, I love it. It's when I was first thinking about going, and I was really not sure if I could handle the work or not. Like I really don't know, but it's great. Very weird, strange things that you think are going to be really hard, they just become normal. And yeah, I would rate it like an 8 or 9 out of 10. If any of you are interested, I have some numbers to give you. And there is, I don't know if you remember from when Ryan and Leroy came through here, but there's a camp week in, I think it's September. It's where pretty much a bunch of youth come into Mountain View and clean the thing from top to bottom. And it's pretty much just gives youth a bit of a glimpse of what Mountain View life is like. And so it'd be great if you all came. Any questions that you're curious about?
Do you have church services on campus there, or how's that?
Thank you. Yes, we do. Trying to remember, but for like the last month and a half probably, we've just been having church services just on Mountain View there. We usually go to Oak Grove Church, which is just a few minutes away, but they canceled services. They didn't have services for a long time, and we just had a short church service right there on campus. We didn't have any Sunday school, just a devotional and a short sermon, and yeah, it was. This Sunday was actually the first Sunday that Mountain View staff went to Oak Grove for church, and Oak Grove is having services outside, because otherwise they would have to sanitize everything after a service inside, and I think they're still kind of sitting in families and more or less social distancing, I think. But yeah, so things are starting to opening up in Virginia, but from what I've heard, Virginia is one of the more locked down states, and it's very slowly opening back up. Any other questions? Alrighty. Someone's supposed to close the service. Okay. Turn it over to Eric.
Thank you to each one who took part. Thank you, Tyler, for the update. It's good to hear what you've been up to. Does anyone have any announcements or prayer requests tonight before we close? All right. God bless you with a good week. Let's stand for closing prayer. Heavenly Father, we come to you tonight at the close of this service. We thank you that we can be together like this again. Thank you that we can sing together and worship you in that way. Pray that you will be with Tyler as he goes back to Mountain View. Bless him there, bless the work there. Pray that you will be an encouragement to the people there as well. Pray that you'll be with us this week. Give us a good week. Help us to be a consistent witness and a testimony for you to go throughout our week. Dismiss us now with your blessing. In Jesus' name we pray.